Thank you very much for coming, especially as we've got this very interesting venue. And so what I want to do is I want to tell you about two courses that I run. And the one course has been a work that I've dedicated myself to for more than 20 years. And that's the How to Love course. And the other one, Learning to Love, is fairly new. It's out of my work helping parents and teachers to understand how children think at different ages. Because it's the way children think at different ages that creates these special differences between children and adults. And I'll start off by just describing a little bit about children's development. So we are getting to know more and more about children's development now through neuroscience. But just preceding that, there have been changes in the way that psychologists think about how children think, because of the way children respond to discipline and guidance, and particularly to understand how the attachment of a child to their parent in the beginning sets whatever's going to be happening after that. So what we know now is that the connection between the child and the carer, the main person to care for the child, is so important because the child develops themselves out of the connection. And it's used to be thought that children could develop anyway, no matter who cared for them. But there have been horrible experiments with children. For example, a king took in a number of children and wouldn't allow the carers to speak to the children. And they were fed and they died. And there have been more experiments on children taken from the point of view of if we watch, we will be able to learn from what they do. But this was before it was recognized that although the child has everything in them to become human, it has not yet been formed to the task that the child needs to become human. And so the brain matter is all there, but what hasn't been created is the experiences that connect. And it's those experiences that make this very amazing being who can call on their experiences. So imagine there are two children here. One child has had a very good ongoing connection with their parent or main carer, and in that caring, the child has been very, very drawn to everything that that person did. And in their interest is a deep secret, and that is how the mirror neurons in the brain can actually respond as if the child is doing what they are observing. So we still do a little bit of mirroring ourselves with our mirror neurons, in that while I'm talking to you and moving my hands and moving my voice box, so in your brains they will be lighting up in the same way as mine is, although I'm doing something and you're listening. And what that means is that when we are attuned with someone, we are so attuned that everything about us is responding. And how do we know that everything is responding? Because we can now see the lighting up in the brain. And then we need to know that the lighting up in the brain doesn't come first. The response in us comes first, and the brain shows that that is happening. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not that the mirroring that you are doing is starting in the lighting up of the brain and then experienced in you. It's the other way around. So with that picture, if we've got one child who's had very good and regular attention and one child who's had far less, then the second child hasn't had the opportunity to respond and hasn't had the opportunity to make inside themselves everything out of the response. So in a very simple way, if a child is listening to somebody saying their name, then all that time before they speak that name, they have been responding in all the right places in order to say the name when they can get to it. But what is taking place between hearing it for the first time and being able to say their own name is that this reaction is starting to educate the whole of their voice system. So in the beginning, children can't speak because they haven't yet created their organs out of listening to speaking. Even though everything is there, it has to come to a maturity in order to be used. And so it is with everything in a child's body. They have to experience everything in order for it to be part of them. And so we can even see that when children are in an environment where there's a lot of music, they will move differently to children who haven't heard any music. And that is because they have been making parts of themselves out of the music that they hear. And when you observe children a lot, you'll be able to see how they move because of what they've experienced. So a child who's had music will move in a certain way. A child who's had a lot of shouting will move in a different way. And because they are creating themselves out of every single experience. Not only what is very active in the environment, but also the shapes and the colors and the temperatures and absolutely everything around the child is something that they are reacting to. So then, when we can see that the forming of this child is out of their experience, and we have an expectation that they will be able to do more than they've had time to create, then our expectations are pressing on the child, not in that they will be able to do what we want them to do, but they are now making themselves out of these frustrations. So as soon as we start seeing difficult behavior, then it is something like these frustrations where there's been expectation beyond their ability pressed on them. And so we have very strange things happening as a result of the person who cares for them or people around having expectations that this child is perhaps not yet speaking but understands everything. Now you can only really understand it by the time you're able to use it in one or two different situations. So to be able to just repeat something is only to understand the shape and the sound of the word. To be able to apply that word to different situations and it's appropriate, then you will really see that they are understanding it. So if I may give a little example of Michael's daughter last week, where she witnessed the melting of the candle for her birthday. And then as the candle moved, so the melted wax dropped, and before anyone could stop her, she had got a little bit of hot wax on her finger. And so then afterwards, she was saying, a little bit of wax, because someone had said, oh, you've got a little bit of wax. And you could feel the understanding of this little bit of wax growing and growing every time she said it. So now when I'm working with parents who have unfortunately not been helped enough for this early stage, meeting difficulties in their children, it's up to me to try and create the picture of where we could find out what it is that's missing, and then be able to start bringing into parenting practice what you can do because of that. So for example, I will often say that it is time now to treat the child as if he or she is much younger, because that gives them the opportunity. So, you know, when a child can walk around competently and do many things, we can go too fast in our belief of what they can do. And then the pressure is on, and then with the pressure and not understanding, as you can see how my hands are moving, it becomes all congested, and what are we going to do with all this frustration? It's going to come out as a tantrum or some aggression or something like that. And then a big problem begins, and that is that there's an aggressive reaction to the aggression. A sharpness, a shock, but there's something too strong physically for what's happening in the child. And so they have to take that in too, making themselves out of that interaction. And that's how aggression is going to develop. And it will start with this pressure, and then it will become an imitation of it. And the imitation isn't something like, I would like to copy what you do because I like you. It's an irresistible urge to replicate. And children need that irresistible urge because they have to learn so much. And if a child would be discerning in the early years, then they would be able to say, I'm not learning that. And that would incapacitate them for life. So this situation of having an irresistible urge to learn, everything is taken in, no matter what, and it comes out exactly as it was when it went in. So if I might give you an example of a situation that I observed, I was sitting together with the mother of this little child, and we were in the bathroom, sitting on the side of the bath. And her son, not yet speaking, came into the bathroom where we were sitting, and he walked past us without looking looking at the bathroom scales. And then he looked at the bathroom scale and he stood on it. And then he looked down at the dial and then he stood up and went, "Damn!" It was so perfect. We knew exactly who was upset about their weight increase. So this perfection is what makes us able to become a genius, because that learning power means that they can learn everything by observing it and becoming it. So if we provide around them what we want them to experience, they will do that. If we don't understand this process and do other things, then we won't be very pleased with the result. So for example, in the course I often tell people, how do you fill the washing machine? Think of how you put the washing machine on. First of all, how do you approach the dirty laundry? Do you take one beautiful garment at a time and put it in the washing machine? Or do you grab and shove? And how fast is your grab and shove? And how fast does the door close? And pull out the drawer and put in the soap and close it. And then smack the button. Now imagine what a small child can do with that. Well, they can go out and they can smack baby brother. And they can, you know, if you've kicked the door, they can kick something, they can smash something, and they can take it. Because as soon as a small child has taken it in with the irresistible urge, they just want to do it and do it and do it until they have perfected it. And then in the meanwhile, they're getting other reactions. So up until a child is ready for school, they don't discern. They have no power to criticize something in a way that they would then reject it. This they can do later. So they become these perfect examples of their life experience. And I've had the pleasure of witnessing some very interesting abilities in small children. For example, some children brought up in the tradition of begging or stealing are really, really good at it because they can perfect it. They don't have to battle with what it's all about. So if you are going to teach a child to be a thief, start young. In the same way as if you want to teach a child to love the environment, care for animals, enjoy their food, that puts another picture to how we're going to look after the small children. And so I just want to say something more on this before I go on to talking about the How to Love course. And that is that very soon in a child's life, they are experiencing punishment. Even if it's done in a so-called gentle way. And the conflict for a small child being punished is that they are taken out of the space they would be in of just imitating and put into this very difficult situation of being asked to reflect on something that they've done, and the thing that they have done, they are not the originators of it. They are the pictures of what they've experienced. So can you see that if you were suddenly punished for pronouncing the letter P all of a sudden, it would be bizarre for you that you had to, every time you said P, you had to go and sit somewhere. And what sort of thing is happening? I'm being made to sit somewhere. What do I do with that? Well, what I can do with it is, as soon as I go home, I make my baby brother sit somewhere. Or take the cat or the dog. Working with a family who had been so sincere about teaching their child to be aware of the environment and not to do any harm to the environment, was unable to play because she was busy making sure that nobody else harmed the environment. Until one day, when taken to the beach, she went up to the children who were digging a hole and said, "You must not do this. Look at what you are doing. Fill in this hole." And she wouldn't allow them to carry on playing. She made quite sure that they filled the hole and covered it up as if nobody had been there. And so this became the moment for this child's parents to see that they could not do it that way. And so then we have to go back, and start just doing what we want the small child to do, and not talking about what it is, so that they can simply do what we do. And now I want to jump to this How to Love course. So it's a course that lasts for a year. We meet once a month for 2 hours and go through a theme. And in the theme are exercises that you're going to take with you into the rest of the month. And in that month, to meet with a few of your colleagues in the course to talk about your experiences and perhaps maybe understand something a little better when you hear it discussed by the others. And when you are able to see this course in light of what I was telling you before, you start to see that there's a connection between what happens in childhood by nobody being especially cruel. But this then becomes the huge difficulty that we have in our adult relationships. And so in the first place, in the first lesson, I talk about people becoming constricted by iron bands, and these iron bands represent a trauma in childhood from this difficulty of not being able to process the mismatch between the guidance and the education and the natural process of the child. And when such an iron band grabs you, you cannot behave in a normal way as you might expect you could. For example, if somebody said to somebody, "Don't do that, that's stupid," somebody will completely clamp into an iron band and feel such outrage and lose their temper to such an extent that the person who said don't do that is alarmed. Why is this reaction so strong? And we say these things like don't be stupid because we're very unconscious of what language we use. And to the person who it's been said to, they have gone rushing back to a traumatic moment, and now they are lost. And they can't behave rationally because they're so trapped back in that experience. And it might take someone days to be able to see what had just happened to them. Now that's quite an easy example. There are other things that we have in our relationships where the expectations of one on another are the very thing that are causing this clamping down. But there's a common thing that we all do, and this is the one that we learn about in the first lesson, and that is that there's something that I do that sets off your iron bands, and there's something maybe that you do that sets off mine. And when I can see it happening to the people around me, I start to become much more aware of what is going on. For example, if you can witness somebody else going into that state, then you will be able to start understanding when it happens to you. But up until you've worked with this theme, you have the thought that the other person is horrible and they upset me. Yes, and then I can't think why, and I don't know what they did, but I know that I got very upset. And this awareness of it happening in others is the first step. Now in the second lesson, we then have a look at what we can reduce so that we're not setting off other people. And when we learn, it's one of those very common things that we do to each other. And it comes out of our thought that the other has made a mistake or is wrong or something like that. And then we say something. And that causes these iron bands to go on. So, if we learn not to do that, the next month we start to witness the person that we are secretly practicing on is changing. And they are becoming more relaxed and more free. And it's just amazing of what we can do to help the other by simply reducing these things that we do in an everyday way. And then through the course, we start to explore what it is that makes us come to this thought that there is something wrong about the other. For example, when you were a child and you were learning everything that was around you, you were creating the reality of what you experienced inside you. And because we didn't all grow up side by side, we haven't had the same experiences. And so we have made ourselves completely different from each other. None of us are the same. The internal construction of our brains is completely unique to each one. But I only live in myself. And because I only live in myself, I read the others as if they had what I've got. And so if I'm not aware of doing this, I will conclude that they're wrong. I might set out to persuade them how wrong they are. And in fact, we're doing it all the time. Even if we don't say it, we're doing it. And then that leads further into the course, where we start to recognize that we're actually picking up details of the other. And it's those details that then become the door to discovery. Because when I see a detail in somebody that I am shocked at, or dislike, or feel nauseous about, or convinced that they are wrong, then I am fixing them into a place of wrongness. So I need a way of working with this, and that's when we start learning how to study a detail. And then when you have studied a detail, something happens, and it changes your perspective of what that is. And now you're free of it. And you can even find yourself discovering amazing things by studying a detail. And that will develop into more and more awareness. So over the 12 lessons, in the first year that you've been through it, you will find that you are having a different way of experiencing the people around you, in that they are so much more interesting and they are so much more likable. And the person that used to really set you on edge is interesting, lovable. You might have started your study on something that you thought was outrageous or totally disgusting, and after that you're so interested in it that you're noticing it all around you with interest and no more outrage and disgust. And then we have our philosophical discussions in the groups of, well, what is wrong and how do we tell, and so on, and that becomes really interesting. And you work on it in your small groups as well. So these questions are very interesting. For example, what did I mean by a detail? Now if I give you this example, do you remember falling in love? And when you were really completely overwhelmed and in love, there was no detail could be a problem, because you were sort of dreaming into each other, and it isn't quite clear who's thinking which thought or who's giving which answer. And then at some point somebody does or says something that causes the other to wake up a little bit out of this dreamy, delicious state. And that is a detail. So then, the more you wake up to the details, the more you look at each other in an analytical way. Somebody I knew whose family was so keen that she just settled down with someone. She kept meeting all the perfect matches, and she would go out with them and come home and describe a detail that she couldn't bear. And the one that sticks in my mind was, as this man was saying good night to her at the door, he leant forward and the light shone through his ears. And that was a detail. You see, it's this waking up to an actual thing about the other person. You don't even have to like it or not like it, but it makes you analytical and it makes you see it in a kind of starkness. Now, very soon we are looking for details that we don't like. And certain things are very easy to point out. For example, people's domestic habits. Do they actually know how to use a dishwasher? Do they actually know how to do these domestic tasks? Is it possible that they've got through life up until now not being able to do certain things in certain ways? And slowly, this analyzing of each other becomes so strong that it's as if you're looking at each other through the icy light of day and not this warm, easy comfort with each other. So now we've got the two sides, the antipathy and the sympathetic blending. Now, it isn't that we must now try and get back there. And people do. They try really hard. Let's go back to when it was like that. But the details keep popping up. So what we do in this course is we take a detail and we study it, and we study it in such a particular way. So, for example, my favorite example is tea slurping. So there was a situation in my life where somebody would come and sit next to me and go, and at that time I could not bear it. And we all have our things we cannot bear. But I couldn't bear it, and I would think, I should sit somewhere else. When's the right moment to move? Or say, is your tea hot? And try and think, well, if I change the mugs around, would that work? Anyway, so, and then I got it. I have to study this detail. So now I begin my study. Does it happen every time? Is it the same sound every time? Does anything happening around us cause that sound to be different? Are there days when there isn't a slurp to be heard? And then become interested in other slurpers. Do they slurp in the same way? Do people have unique ways of slurping? And so I start to build up my knowledge on tea slurping. And then when I'm right in full study and I am ready to become the world's expert, this person doesn't slurp tea anymore. And I'm struck. I feel a loss. I haven't finished. And any detail that you take to study, and you really study it seriously, and it has to be a secret. You cannot tell anyone what you're studying. So then what will happen is you will go through some sort of change yourself. And what happens at the same time is that you are not putting antipathy into the atmosphere when you hear a slurp. You're putting interest. And you change the whole environment. And so there isn't a detail that we can't study. A very lovely client of mine came to tell me how her husband took advantage of her in every single way, and how she couldn't stand it any longer, I said, give me an example. He comes home from work and he sits on the bed and he rolls off a sock and throws it at the wash basket. And I'm listening to her and she says, there's a lid on the wash basket. And every day he rolls off his socks and throws them at the wash basket. And she says, and he expects me to come there and pick them up and unroll them and put them in the wash. So I said, now come on, let's study this together. Let's really look at what this means, because it seems to me that there's more meaning in this than we've discovered up until now. So I said to her, now, when does he go and sit down? As soon as he comes in, he walks upstairs, he sits on the bed, and he takes off his shoes, and he takes off his socks. So I said, well, how do you know this? Well, I see him, and he sits there, and he takes off his shoes, and then he rolls off his socks, throwing them one at a time at the wash basket. So I said, well, could it be like this? He's so glad to be home. And what is home for him? That is, he's going to sit on his bed, and he's home, and he can take his shoes off. And now that the shoes are off, he can take off his socks. And what better way to take off your sock than to roll it off your foot? Now what do? It's a lovely rolled up sock. Well, throw it at the wash basket and do the other one the same way. So I said, you know, the day that he doesn't come home, there will be no socks there. So he has to come home for there to be socks there. And those socks don't have to look like burdens. They could be the 2 rosebuds that he brings home every night for you. She was furious. I'll never be able to think of them in the same way again. But there, so if you can be helped, or you can think it through yourself by studying it. But can you feel now that we've moved from the way she saw the detail into the way that he's experiencing something? We may not be absolutely right, but we have taken away all that atmosphere that is around it. You know, she'd been telling him for months and years not to do it, so that didn't work. And then all the atmosphere is there, and now we've got 2 rosebuds. So, I mean, that's what I can do to help somebody. But you don't even have to go that far. You don't even have to find a metaphor for it. You can just do it like tea slurping. You really become interested. You really lose your nausea for it. You are joyful whenever you hear a slurp, because you've done the work. So that's what I meant about a detail. And now the question is, are we to like and be interested in everybody that comes into our lives? Let's consider the fact that you feel it's a bit of a shock that I would ask you to meet everybody in the same way, that you would be interested in them. So first of all, the one thing that happens while we are trying our best to love someone, or to tolerate them, or even just not to be nasty to them, in that effort, you are exhausted. You will become so exhausted at trying to be good. And this is the focus. I am trying to be a good person, a person interested in someone, a person who's kind all the time. This is so tiring. And so now if we change the focus and not on what I will achieve, but just take the interest. And as soon as I've started practicing, I'm getting better at it. And now anybody I meet, I can do it to whatever level I can reach. And so everybody becomes interesting. And everything they do becomes interesting, including taking 2 car park spaces. It's so interesting. And many, many more things that people do that otherwise you might feel some irritation for. You can work on understanding people. So I recommend in what we do with the course is each person on the course secretly chooses a person to study. And it's better to stick with that person because you need to go through these barriers of wanting to give the whole thing up and thinking, no, it's no use, they're still horrible. And you just have to go through it. And then something else happens, and that is the little group that you're in. Hopefully your groups are not too harmonious, and you find very soon you're irritated with someone. More practice. Lovely. Yeah. So that's why it's not too much. It will always be just what you need, and everybody becomes interesting. Also, what changes when you stop being good is that because you're not trying to be good, you're not tired, you're not getting exhausted, and the whole point of being interested in someone refreshes you. So you will find all these relationships can become refreshing. Then what you need to learn is the balance between being interested or giving in to someone. We don't give in to them. We don't become doormats. And so we spend a whole lesson on doormats and thieves. And we find that everyone is a bit of a doormat and a bit of a thief, and how to balance that. And mainly what it is to experience your own freedom to be yourself and not force what your needs are on the other, and the vice versa. The other is free to be themselves and not force what they do on me. So I learned to say no thank you. And whenever somebody is trying to persuade me to do their thing in their way, and I'm not inclined to do that, not just because I'm always being oppositional, but really because I feel that would not be exactly what I want to do in them. And I can just say no thank you. Or I can see the point and I can say sure. But not that I'm fighting for my independence from someone who is forcing me to do things. And that is what can happen in couples. This forcing on each other. I can't be happy until you do such and such. Not at all. I can be perfectly happy no matter what you do, because I build myself up. And it doesn't, and as soon as I've reduced the atmosphere, the oppositional stuff goes away. So, Couples attending the course together would be best advised not to work together. So to belong to a different group and to not even discuss what's going on, because otherwise it could fall into something like this. You know exactly what we're supposed to do this month. So it's a little bit harder, and maybe couples shouldn't even go to the same course, because you have to take this on yourself. It's a private study, and it's certainly freeing. It makes you healthier, it makes the others healthier. So I discovered that a long time ago, how healthy the others became when I did my studies on them. And we have it now confirmed in neuroscience that one loving look to another raises the dopamine in their brains, which makes the connections, which makes it easier to make the connections. So they are leaping ahead, making their connections and experiencing their world out of iron bands. So if I do a study on someone and develop an interest in them, then they will see my loving looks, and that's what makes them healthier. And there'll be more to learn on that. In the first part of the love course, we look at trauma from the point of view of the others. So the main part of the course is to understand others. You will go a little slower through the course if you always apply it to yourself. But the first thing is to be able to see the consequence of trauma in the others. The iron bands are one, and the other one is childhood longings. And like I was telling you at the beginning, the first stage of childhood, if the care is not consistent, then the care will become the thing that this person is longing for and making demands on their close relationships for care. In the next stage of childhood, where love and belongingness is really what makes it possible for us to learn, if that was not developed at school and at home, then there will be a longing to force myself on others and groups that they have to love me and love me there. And yet, when I'm doing that, I can't feel it if they do. So I complain they don't accept me, but meanwhile they have, but I haven't developed the organ to be able to feel it. So we start to recognize this, including the third stage of longing. And when we know that that's happening to those people who are making the demands on us, we don't feel a resistance, but we feel compassion. And the compassion is what moves us into another atmosphere with them. Compassion it will come about naturally in the course. We don't have to pretend that we're being compassionate. We don't have to work hard at being compassionate. The exercise just make it open up. So in developing the capacity to love, the first thing that we're going to discover is these moments of compassion that get released. And they are so amazing, they can be quite overwhelming of how much compassion you can experience, where before it was resistance. And then the next is that you start to experience that your ability to love someone has expanded. And you can do it in more ways than you had imagined. You feel this love flowing out of you, and as it flows, so it seems to become more abundant behind the flow. And I can only describe it like that. You need to experience it to know what that feels like. So any encounter and any listening to someone is very easy because of this replenishing that's happening. And this is a very interesting question. If you are observing and experiencing, does that replace the need to talk about things? It certainly will take away the need to tell the other how irritating they've been, and how now that I've developed this lovely way, I don't feel so irritated with you, but you might just stop that thing anyway. So, because the rule site needs to be private. And then you will find you will still do the nagging and the getting at people, but you'll start to feel the difference from when you held it back or when you gave it out. And when you start experiencing that difference, you start to become stronger not to do it. Because when you stop doing it, it is no longer a problem. And not only is it not a problem, it's not that you have to ignore it and it is still a problem somewhere. It isn't a problem. It's interesting. It's even funny. So you step away from the pain of all these things. Now, the last part of the course is about forgiveness. And I take forgiveness in 3 stages, because the different ways that we understand forgiveness is, many people say, well, forgiveness is just for me and not for the other. Well, in the first lesson that I do, it is for you. It's about releasing the trauma that made that thing unforgivable. So when we release the trauma, we are able to start letting go of holding me and the other in there to suffer for life and further. That's not forgiving. And when I do that, I feel inside me a very uncomfortable feeling when I am at that point of, I won't forgive and I won't forgive that one. I tie us together that I cannot stop thinking about it, or I can't move away from it. I place it in me. So if I can take that moment of where the agony happened to me and free it, which we do in a very slow and careful way, you feel it moving away. And now we have to come to the thought, I've moved the other away from me, and the deed still exists. Now, if that deed is, if I think about the deed as I condone it, that will distress me and I'll bring it back again. But I don't condone it, but I also don't tie it to that person for life and ever after. So I can take the deed as the injury that is separate from the future of that person. It was done, but it is not necessary that it becomes their future. And so I can start letting the other free of it. Now, as soon as I let the other free into the future, then I'm not holding it into me. And I can look at the event in a factual way. I can look at it in the same way as I asked this young wife to look at the rosebuds. Before that, it was unforgivable because he was taking advantage of her. If we free it, he's just simply coming home and so grateful to be in a place of safety and beauty that he can be playful with his socks. And so we can separate it and not take it into the future. And then we have one more part to look at about forgiveness, and that is, what if someone is in such poor shape that they cannot break into the future, but they are stuck in the past and they hang on to it? Now that person will, if we aren't working on a way of remaining with them, you see, we've learned how to balance, we've learned how to say no thank you, but we are now in this process of setting the other free. Then it may be that I take care of them inwardly with a kind of faithfulness, with a kind of readiness for the forgiveness that they could take into the future. Because with this act of practical love, the other can get well, and the other can stop injuring others if they are set free of it. And so at the moment I can just tell you that it's possible, and you will have to decide whether you want to have a go at that. But it is possible, and I experience it over and over again. Now, what people have said about doing the love course is that it can change many things for you. It can even do some of its work even if you don't do your homework. If you just come and you just talk to people and listen to them, it makes a difference already. But if you practice the exercises, it makes a huge difference. And at this point in my life, I would like people to know that they can do the work and they can take it further with others. So I'm inviting people to do the course 3 times and then take it on yourself and take it further. It will be, it won't be an arduous training if you're ready to take it on for yourself. It's just understanding the lessons that you need. And so you need a first look, and then the next time you come round and you think, oh, was I here before? Did I ever hear this? And it has a freshness. And by the 3rd time, it's starting to become part of your daily life. Some people take it on already in the first one. So this is what I wanted to share with you this evening. So the 2 courses, I know that sometimes parents come along to the How to Love and they need more support, and that's why I do the Learning to Love course, looking at the 3 stages of childhood. So in the Learning to Love course, these are the titles, and having told you a bit, you will start to hear what it's about. Everything you do matters. How to make what you do bring peace into your home. The 2nd month, joy-inspired parenting styles. Learn how to see the true person within your child and let the true person in your child guide your parenting. Talking and listening are strictly human qualities. How to use listening to guide your talking. What is my child telling me about me, and what am I telling my child about her or himself? So what am I telling my child about themselves if I say, sit there, you've done wrong? The next one is, what is the battle? Why do I struggle? And why do they resist? And so we're really getting down there now. And the last one is, they're safe to learn, and then they're learning to learn, and then they master the world. And that's what we want for our children. So, thank you very much. I've finished 7 minutes earlier. We'll stop now, and anyone can come and ask me some questions on their way so that we can be out of here by 9:30. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very grateful. Thank you.